got the cornfield calm, Midwest tone, but he's spitting facts like a dog with a bone. Lanky frame, fire-haired, eyes on the case, breaking down the game in the darkest place. Sports scores to murder boards, Hoosier logic cuts like swords. From Friday lights to chalked out lines, this redhead's brain rewrites the lines inside the Hoosier mind, where the stories twist and stats unwind. He's a legend in flannel, mic in hand, digging deep where few can stand. From touchdowns to crime scenes raw, he's got the truth in every draw. Yeah, step in if you dare to find what's brewing inside the Hoosier mind. He'll talk Pacers, Colts, or Colts on trial. Hoosier humor with a devilish smile. He's that redhead sleuth with a box of clues, takes your headline, breaks the news. With every stat and every scream, he's painting portraits in your stream. Don't blink, he'll tie it tight, from game night wins to murder fight. Inside the Hoosier mind, where the facts hit hard and the lines are blind. He's a ginger ninja, smooth and slick, cracking cases play by play quick. From courtrooms to the hardwood floor, he digs for more than just the score. Tune in and don't rewind, you're deep now inside the Hoosier mind.
All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome into Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice from lovely Indiana, where we are finally into fall weather. It's cool out. It's actually a little like chilly in the morning and whatnot. Fall's here. We're deep into football season. And of course, with that, now with some of the big coaching changes, obviously James Franklin got fired. Virginia Tech's coach got fired a few weeks ago. So did UCLA. Billy Napier was fired even after a win after Saturday. He was fired that following Sunday. So many changes have happened in college football, and we even have some NFL coaching fires and whatnot. And with that comes, of course, the heat of rumors, because now everybody, for some of these teams, it's basically the end of their season. There's potential for bowl eligibility. There's maybe some bright spots. Maybe you get a big win against a rival here or there. So there's still some fun to be had. But for a lot of these teams, if they're, looking for championship aspirations, those are long since out and gone out the window. And that's the case for Penn State and for Florida, both, who are now going to be looking for their head coaches going into the offseason. But of course, that also leads to some of the interesting rumors as to who some of these coaches might be. And we've heard a lot of different names for some of these different programs. We've heard different names for Penn State. Florida, I've only honestly heard one name, and it seems that they only have one big fish that they're going after, but I don't know if they're going to be able to get him. I think they're going to try nonetheless. I don't know if they're going to be successful, which will be the first thing we dive into. We're also going to cover LSU getting beat by Vanderbilt. Unfortunately, when I did my picks for college football this week, I actually ended up going 20-10, and I was really hoping that the LSU game was going to be one that I got wrong, because I'd be okay with being 19-11 if it meant that my Tigers ended up winning. And unfortunately, I was correct, and they ended up losing to a running quarterback, which, again, not super. But nonetheless, let's get into the first topic as far as Florida goes. Florida is rumored that they really want to try to go after Lane Kiffin. And I do get it because of the track record of success that Lane Kiffin has had over the years. And I heard this earlier on the radio, as far as the host was kind of confused at the fact of why Lane Kiffin has even continued to get jobs as a head coach, considering the fact that he has bounced around just about everywhere during his tenure. So to do a little rewind as far as Lane Kiffin goes, where he comes from as far as his head coaching background and whatnot, he got his first ever head coaching start at Oklahoma, the Oakland Raiders back in 2007. He went 4-12 with them. Started 2008 1-3, and then was fired mid-season. So he went 5-15 in the NFL as a head coach. The following year, in 2009, he goes to college. He goes to Tennessee, takes them 4-6, 7-6, 4-4 in the SEC, and they lose in the Chick-fil-A Bowl. Then he leaves there, goes to USC, and a USC actually has a pretty decent little stretch there. He goes there in 2010. They go 8-5, 10-2, 7-6, and then 3-2. With the infamous, he got fired basically as soon as he got on the tarmac because he was 0-2 in the Pac-12, and that was from 2010 to 2013. While he was at USC, 28-15 as a head coach. He was 17-12 when they were in the Pac-10/Pac-12. Not terribly bad, and Brady Quinn brought this up on that same show. Of that goes to show you how much USC has really fallen as a program since the Matt Leinart, since the Reggie Bush days, since the Pete Carroll days, that they did have a quality coach. Now, obviously, back during that time, and I've heard through the documentary, I haven't seen the documentary yet, but I've heard very great things about it, that Lane had a lot of personal issues going on. And as a result, he unfortunately, kind of cost himself some coaching opportunities, and even probably more likely his job there at USC. But to be almost, for every 2 wins you have 1 loss as a head coach there at USC, that's pretty dang good considering the fact of they were 5-6 years removed from the back-to-back national championship status and whatnot. USC had really fallen off the map, and he was able to bring them back to some type of relevancy as as a team and on the national stage. So he leaves USC, then he goes to FAU, goes Florida Atlantic, goes 11-3, wins his conference, wins the Boca Raton Bowl. Second year, not as good. He goes 5-7, 3-5 in the conference, but then surges back in 2019. He goes 10-3, 7-1 in the conference, and then goes back to Boca Raton. But technically, he does not get credit for them going to the Boca Raton Bowl because he got hired by Ole Miss and started with the Rebels the COVID year, actually. And since he's been with Ole Miss, they've been fantastic. I mean, their worst season was the COVID year. They went 5-5. After that, 10-3, 8-5, 11-2, 10-3, and now 6-1 to start the year. He's 50-19 with Ole Miss. And for anybody who doesn't really follow college football, this is Ole Miss, who historically they had one good coach prior to that. And I'm going to look up his name because it is kind of a big name for Ole Miss, but it's nothing, ridiculously crazy. But he's taken that program to heights that Ole Miss has not been to in an extremely, extremely long time. And he's made them a relevant program. He's made them back to a program that recruits want to come to, that there is a level of attraction for Ole Miss. And it was always it was kind of there. You always seem to have people that liked Ole Miss. They definitely liked the uniforms and whatnot. But it was never a truly, nationally recognized program as far as, if you go to Ole Miss, you're going to be solid. So looking at the head coaching records, and I don't believe this is current for Lane's record, but I'm going to make sure. So he's 50-19. Yeah, so this does not have this does not include his wins so far this season. But as far as the best coach since then, you could argue Hugh Freeze did really well with Ole Miss from 2016 to from 2012 to 2016. He went 35-19 with them. He did pretty well. Ed Ogeron, former LSU coach, was not good with Ole Miss. He even admitted in an interview that he did not do well with Ole Miss as a head coach. You got to really go all the way back to Johnny Vaught, from 1947 to 1970 and then 1973. He went 190 and 61. So you're talking 50 plus years since they've had that type of a coach there in Ole Miss to bring the program back to prominence, bring it back to relevancy, and make it any type of an attractive destination spot. And he's managed to do that with Ole Miss. Here's the other reason why there's a lot of rumors to Lane Kiffin going to Florida. He's held all the different positions there and whatnot. He actually committed to Fresno State to play quarterback, but I thought I saw something about him being. Okay, so he's actually never played for Florida. For whatever reason, I thought he was like a Florida alumni or something like that. I must be. I know for Penn State there is an alumni that is rumored to be out there for a head coach consideration. But nonetheless, though, when you look at Lane Kiffin, you kind of look at his demeanor now, how he acts, the visor, he's tan, he does have, property down in Florida and whatnot. He does fit the Gators. Now, one of the questions that was brought up was, is Florida still an attractive destination spot for a head coach to want to come to? And the reason why I asked that is, gone are the days of the Tim Tebow era with Urban Meyer, where, they were, national, they won 2 national titles. Tim Tebow wins the Heisman, and, Florida's on a nationally competitive stage. You got to remember, that was as late as 2008. That's been 17, almost 20 years ago. Since then, Florida's had some up and down years, up until I believe the COVID year. They were really close to winning the SEC, and unfortunately ended up falling short. And, that was just 5 years ago. Florida still has the benefit of having the brand and having the money. I think where Florida starts to get into the issue is now all of the other teams, the SEC, have really been able to start utilizing their money like they can now. Because obviously, for the unwritten rule that nobody ever wants to admit is, the SEC paid players before it was legal. They'll just, most of those programs and whatnot will probably never admit that, which is fine. But that's why we've started to see a drop off in the SEC dominance, and now you've started to see more of the Big Ten upkeep and upplay, because the SEC and everybody is allowed to legally pay their players now. Now all of that talent and whatnot is spread out. You don't have Alabama with, 6 5-star recruits deep at one position. So even if they put their backups in, their backups would basically be starters in any other college. So that's one thing Florida has to compete with, is now the playing field is really leveled, and it's essentially whoever has the most money, they got to try to make a run for it then. And the other issue is you are in the SEC. You have to deal with the likes of Georgia, because Georgia's going to be one of your protected rivals. Even if you still continue to rotate through some of these teams, you've got Georgia is constantly going to be on there. You've got Alabama's going to be waiting. You've got LSU, Tennessee, you've got Texas, you've got Oklahoma. Like, you have all of these teams that are deep and continuing to run deep. Terry, I appreciate you joining, ma'am. I will be talking about your Dolphins a little later, and I am so sorry the whooping that the Dolphins took on Sunday. I was not expecting that by any means, but if you are so inclined to give me your thoughts on the Dolphins and their whole coaching situation and whatnot, because it seems like it's a mess down there in Miami right now. So if you want to be so inclined to give your thoughts, I would appreciate it. But for Lane Kiffin in Florida, again, I'm not saying it's not an attractive job. I'm not saying that I don't think he couldn't be successful. I think with Ole Miss and where he's at with Ole Miss, you do have the benefit of an easier SEC schedule. Now, again, albeit Ole Miss is still in the SEC just the same as Florida is, and they're still going to have to face tough teams. They still faced Georgia. They still faced LSU. They lost to one. They won the other one. And you'll still have to eventually face Alabama. You'll still have to eventually go through all of these teams in this rotation of the SEC schedule. So don't get it twisted. It's not like, Ole Miss is more of a cakewalk. It does seem, though, when you look at the scheduling break, that when you look at the schedule, Ole Miss tends to get more of a break than Florida does, and I don't know if that's purely because of they like the more attractive matchups. It looks better if it's Florida versus Tennessee than say, um, than say Tennessee versus Ole Miss or Arkansas versus Ole Miss. It's just not as an attractive money making matchup. Whereas if you have Florida versus Texas, two nationally big brands, even if they're older brands, even if it's been a while since those brands have had major national success on the football stage, it's still there and it's still something that people are going to watch. And Joel, I appreciate that, good sir. I definitely appreciate that. I'm your favorite Hoosier, at least. Besides yourself, I'm assuming you're probably your own favorite Hoosier, but I appreciate that, brother. Um, so it will be interesting to see, especially at the end of the season, depending on how it goes for Ole Miss. If Ole Miss doesn't try to break the bank to keep Lane, or if Florida doesn't try to do the same and try to poach him. I think if you're Lane, to me, I would almost just stay at Ole Miss. You've had success. This is honestly a team this year that when I first looked at it, they lost their star quarterback that they had for the last few years. They lost a ton of talent on the defense, so it seemed like there was going to be a lot of regression, and that there was going to be a lot of this. Okay, Ole Miss might still be good, but we don't really know what to expect or how good because of the amount of talent that they lost. And here they are sitting at 6-1. They're only lost to Georgia, and they're firmly in control of being able to go in the playoffs. Should they be able to win out? And I'm gonna look at their schedule. I think they should be able to, but I'll double check just to be sure. But nonetheless, if I'm Lane, so this is Ole Miss's remaining schedule. And again, how I talked about the scheduling break for them. So they lost to Georgia. Their next toughest opponent is their next game. It's at Oklahoma. That's this Saturday. So it's at Norman. They might be able to win that. Now, Oklahoma does have a bit of a tough defense that they have to deal with. But Ole Miss is a high scoring, fast offense. They're one of the fastest scoring, fastest moving offenses in all of college football. So it's very possible they might be able to come away with an upset. Hypothetically, even if they don't, their last four games: South Carolina, the Citadel, Florida, and at Mississippi State for the Egg Bowl. So even if they hypothetically lose against Oklahoma, they're going to be sitting there at 10-2, a super huge case for them to be able to make it into the playoffs because they're 10-2. Now, albeit depending on how LSU's schedule goes, which I'll talk about that here in just a bit, you know, the argument might be made if they lose to Oklahoma that they lost both their big ranked matchups as far as teams staying ranked, but they do have a quality win against, at the time, was number 4 LSU. So I mean, they do have the scheduling resume to be able to back it up. Now, one that some people have kind of dismissed and argued with me about, which I do get when you look at their record. But when you actually look at the scores, they do have a win over Arkansas. And I know Arkansas is sitting here at 2-5. They're not the sexiest team by no stretch of the imagination. But you look at almost every single game that they've played against a big time opponent, they have been in that game almost every single time. And what I mean by that, the first game of this losing streak started with Ole Miss. They lost to Ole Miss by 6. Not terrible. They did lose to Memphis. Now, part of that, I believe, was on coaching and just a lot of mental errors. They lost to Memphis by 1. That realistically shouldn't have happened, but is what it is. I think as a result of that, they get blown out by Notre Dame. Then their head coach gets fired. But then they're able to go on the road to Tennessee. They lose by a field goal, and then they host Texas A&M, who's now ranked number 4 in the country. They only lose by 3 to them. So they have the ability to keep it close. They're a better team than what their record says. And I know a lot of people probably disagree with me and don't necessarily agree with that statement. But the facts are the facts. They've kept it close against Tennessee, who's a top team. They've Oh, I had all of that and I was muted. My computer went fuzzy for whatever reason. Okay. Anyway, I'll try to get back on this real quick and hopefully not sound too crazy. But nonetheless, for Lane to want to go to Florida, and I'll do this real quick before I get into Penn State, to me is crazy. I look at it as if you're Lane Kiffin going to Florida, it's kind of like you're a semi-pro / amateur boxer. You got some quality wins, you train really hard, you're good, you can move, like you're right at that level. Don't know if you'll be able to go to the next level or not. You might be able to, but it's going to be a long, tough journey. And if he goes to Florida and the schedule and everything that he has to face, and again, I don't know if this is muted or not before my computer went out, but to cover again real quick, Florida schedule just this year at number 3 LSU, at number 4 Miami, hosted number 9 Texas, at number 5 Texas A&M, Mississippi State, then they host Georgia, not this weekend, but the following weekend, then at Kentucky, at number 8 Ole Miss, host number 17 Tennessee, and then Florida State. Like, if you're Lane Kiffin, do you really want to go through that type of a schedule all the time? Because realistically, and again, this is really no knock on Lane or really knock on any coach. Like, realistically, if you finish the season, let's say 6-6, and you're able to go like 3-3 in some of those marquee matchups, is that really a knock against you as a head coach? Because that's a brutal schedule. Like, how many teams are really going to come out of that with, quality wins basically everywhere? I don't see a lot of quality wins, from almost any team doing that, especially when you have a team that, still trying to find itself, and it would be a rough outing. The next closest team having a tough schedule like that, as far as being able to make an argument, is Alabama, because they faced number 5 Georgia, they faced Vandy, they faced Mizzou, they faced Tennessee, and then they face LSU and Oklahoma. And in the middle of that, they have South Carolina, Eastern Illinois, and Auburn. So, Alabama faces those tough type of schedules. And as much as I dislike Alabama, and I never want to give them credit for anything, Alabama has been battle tested for it for a long time. There are still a lot of the Nick Saban players from his era when he was coaching still on that team. And I say era like it was that long ago. It's only been a couple of years. But that's still a tried and true battle tested team that can go through that. Florida, while it is battle tested, it's hard to get out of that mindset, because you get a big quality win over somebody like Texas, but then you look over and Texas is struggling against a team like Kentucky, and you sit there thinking, okay, well, how really good are they? You can make the same argument for LSU losing to Vandy, and Florida lost to LSU because DJ Lagway threw 5 picks. If you're Florida, okay, LSU won, but how good is LSU to have beaten us like that type of thing? So if I'm Lane, you can consider Florida. I would just say, look at your overall potential success you could have. You have established success in Mississippi in Ole Miss, which is probably the hardest thing to be able to get, is that good foundation, that good culture, and that momentum, because you've had success in the past. You've already been through the growing pains, and you can kind of keep that, and you can keep moving forward. You start over doing that in Florida, it's a little bit harder to get your feet underneath you. It's harder to be able to try to get that traction going. And to me, if it was me, I personally wouldn't take it. But again, that's just me though. But nonetheless, I spent so much longer on this than what I thought I was going to. I actually thought this was going to be a semi-short show, because it's like, I don't know if I could stretch this out or not. Come to find out, I can talk a lot more than what I expected I could. The other one, so Penn State, because one of the discussions earlier I was listening to on the way to work was which would be considered a more attractive job as far as coaching goes. Would Penn State or would Florida be the more attractive position? Obviously, LeVar Arrington, he went to Penn State as a Penn State alum, had a great career there, loves Penn State. He argues that Penn State is the best. Brady Quinn, didn't go to either school. He's, probably about as neutrally unbiased as you can get. He argued that it was probably going to be Florida as far as the money, as far as the potential. the recruits that you have access to in Florida, and if you're able to win the in-state recruitment battle against Miami and against Florida State, you're going to have a better shot than you would with Penn State. So a few of the names have been rumored and ran around with Penn State as far as potential head coaching hires. I've heard anything from Brian Kelly from LSU. They might try to poach him. I've heard, they even put out there, maybe potential coaches that aren't coaching anymore to maybe try to bring in. Ed Ogeron was one of them. Maybe they try to throw the bag at Nick Saban to see if Nick Saban will come out of retirement and fix them. I don't think Nick Saban would do it. Now, Ed Ogeron, that's a maybe. That is a maybe, because he does have a track record of success. He knows how to recruit. He knows how to build a team. As an LSU fan, I'd be happy/sad if Ed went to Penn State, because I would love for him to come back to LSU just personally. But that's just me, because I love Coach O, dude. And if you ever want to see a really good video, there's a YouTube video of him doing an interview just about a month ago or about 2 months ago before the season started. Ed Ogeron is hilarious, super down to earth guy. Seems like he would just be a blast to hang out with. But probably three of the other big names that have been rumored around Penn State as far as who Penn State wants and who realistically Penn State could get. One is Marcus Freeman from Notre Dame, and I don't think that's likely. Marcus Freeman has done such a good job with this Notre Dame team, building it back up to national prominence, and building it where Brian Kelly obviously had limitations. For all the success that Brian Kelly had for that long, getting his team to a national title, doing all of those things with Notre Dame, there was definitely a peak that he had there at Notre Dame that he just couldn't seem to get over the hump. And it seems as though Marcus Freeman is able to get over that hump. And I don't think Penn State would be able to pull him away from the Irish to do that. Just realistically, I don't think they would. I think Marcus Freeman is happy where he's at. I think that you have a lot of personnel decision and a lot of kind of freedom as the head coach of Notre Dame, because you're not bound by a conference. The schedule can be made flexible. And I think, he would probably have a lot of input as far as, hey, who do you want to face? Who do you want us to get a hold of to try to book? Obviously they already have the Clemson rivalry locked up for, I think, the next 10 years. There's rumors that they're still going to try to keep the USC rivalry, which would be big for them, because as far as quality wins goes, because Notre Dame can say, okay, we beat somebody in the ACC, we beat somebody in the Big Ten, we beat this person, we beat that person, we face these teams, And now with a lot of these teams, even as they move to 9-game conference games, one of the options that they have as far as an out-of-conference game, at least SEC-wise, is they have to schedule a out-of-conference opponent that is a Power 4 opponent and or Notre Dame, which could be beneficial. Now, will Notre Dame maybe line up for that with some of those teams? Probably not. But I mean, with the way Marcus Freeman has them playing and how he coaches them, as far as big win against Texas A&M last year, all the way down in College Station, they kept it close to Ohio State there for a few minutes. It wasn't long, but a few minutes. And albeit, even though, Penn State didn't really have any impressive wins last year, they did beat Penn State in order to get to the national title game to start with. And they did beat a really good Indiana team, which a lot of people kind of dismiss and write off. But, you have to give the Hoosiers credit where credit is due. They did do really well with their record last year. And the only teams they lost to were the two teams that ended up being in the national title game to start with anyway. So give credit to them, but I don't see Marcus Freeman leaving Notre Dame to go to Penn State. One of the other, Manny Diaz, who's the head coach of Duke. He's a former coordinator for Penn State. Obviously, he has ties there. He knows how the team works. He knows how, the background. He knows the fans. He knows the culture. He knows all of that. I think that's possible, because you could make the argument that maybe he wants to move up and be in a more successful football program. Not that I don't think he hasn't done a decent job at Duke, but there's a lot of limitations with Duke football, because football is just not where Duke's money is going to go into. Their money is going to go into their basketball team. They are a basketball school. Now, don't get it twisted. They have had success as a football school. They had success the last couple of years. They got, big upset win over Clemson, like dominated Clemson. They've had wins here and there as far as being a good team goes. So they could, but realistically, I don't see Duke pouring in that much money to the football team as far as making them relevant. So if I'm Manny Diaz, do you want to take that next step up and say, okay, let me go to an actual team that has pretty good amount of money and resources, and are great at recruiting, great talent wise. Let me see what I can do there with these pieces. I think that's a realistic possibility as far as Manny Diaz goes. One of the other ones that I think is considered the quote unquote big fish for Penn State that I personally, I don't necessarily understand, and I'm not a huge fan of, is Matt Rule. So Matt Rule is supposed to be considered probably one of the odds-on favorites to go to Penn State and be the next head coach. To me, I don't know if he's necessarily an upgrade over what you had with James Franklin. And I say that because looking at Matt Rule's his tenure in college football, it's not bad. Now, he did do great at the group of 5 level, right? With Temple when he started. So he was with Temple from 2013 to 2016. He was 2-10, 6-6, 10-4, and then 10-3. So he went 28-23 with Temple. And then he goes to Baylor. He's with Baylor from 2017 to 2019. First year with the Bears, 1-11. Then they went 7-6. Then they went 11-3. Not bad. He was 19-20 overall with them. Now, he did have a break there. He goes to Carolina. He goes to the pros. With the Panthers, he went 5-11, 5-12, and then 1-4 before he was fired. After that, so after he's fired, he then decides he wants to go back into college football. He decides to go to Nebraska. Pretty, not super easy, but the opportunity to win and be great is there. So with Nebraska, he's first year 5-7, then he goes 7-6. So flip that a little bit. And now this year he has them sitting there at 5-2. And overall, so coming into or at the end of 2024, he was 2-22 against top 25 teams in his career. Now, give James Franklin credit. I think he was like 18-36 against the top 25. Now, albeit he was 4-21 against the top 10, he does have more quality wins, and he would get you quality wins. Now, most of the issues that James Franklin had as far as quality wins goes, they were against the same people that are in his conference that almost are always the top-heavy conference for the Big Ten. He almost always lost to Ohio State. He only ever beat them once. He did beat Michigan 3 times, but he lost to them 7 times. And when Oregon joined the conference, he lost to them twice. He lost to them in the Big Ten conference game, and then he lost to them just a few weeks ago to start their losing streak that they're on currently right now. I get where people would be frustrated, and even for me, because I was kind of the one that started asking the question of when is enough for them to decide to move on from James Franklin, as far as, who are you going to try to get and what are you going to try to do to have that person get you to the next step? For me, again, my biggest question this entire time, who do you get? I don't think Matt Rule's that guy. And I say that because you look at Nebraska's schedule the last few years. Nebraska's schedule has not been tough. Like it's been tough, but it hasn't been ridiculously crazy as far as, the games that they had to play. So this is just this year as far as their schedule goes. So Nebraska's schedule, they hosted Cincinnati, they won. They hosted Akron, won. They hosted Houston Christian, won. Now they did host Michigan. They ended up losing 27-30. The game was a little bit kind of more far out than what people expected, but they ended up fighting back. They kept it as close as they could. They host Michigan State. They win. They go to Maryland, which that was a tough win because they ended up winning 34-31. And Maryland to me is kind of one of the dark horse teams in the Big Ten that I think won't be this year, but I think within the next couple of years is going to be a team that people are going to have to look out for. And then I think where they start to trip up, and this is where to me, I feel if you're somebody that's considering Matt Rule, you have to have a lot of questions. And I say that because Nebraska is only going to play one ranked team this season, barring any type of major change. They've only played one. It was Michigan. They lost by 3. They go to Minnesota. They lose 6-24. And their next few games, Northwestern, USC, at UCLA, at Penn State, and then they host Iowa. All very winnable games. They could very easily win out and they could go 10-2. Realistically, do I see that happening with Nebraska? Unfortunately not. But if I'm Penn State and I'm wanting to consider a head coach, again, I'm not going to say that's a cupcake gimme schedule, but that's about as easy of a schedule as you can get. You know, you've got a USC team that offensively is dangerous. There's a lot of questions on defense. Northwestern should be an easy win. UCLA seems like a totally different team from when they first started the year, and who knows how that one could go. It also doesn't help that it's at UCLA, so you have to travel. You do have the benefit of you have to face a Penn State team that is, you know, interim head coach. They don't have their star starting quarterback anymore because he's out for the season. And then you have a really bad rivalry game with Iowa. So you could still maybe lose one more game, maybe the Iowa game, and you finish the year 9-3. That's not bad. But considering you're already sitting here at 5-2, and there's no guarantee that you're even going to win out or even win 4 of the next 5 games, that would leave a lot of questions to me if I'm Penn State, or even if I'm a Penn State fan. Why do you want this guy who obviously struggles with what would be considered probably a cupcake schedule to anybody else, and he can't seem to do much with it? And for me, I would have a lot of questions. And supposedly he is like one of the front runners to be able to do it. But again, that's a lot of questions. And one more thing to kind of close on, at least the coaching hiring part that was brought up, was you fire your coach kind of this early into the season, because we're about halfway through the season at this point. If you fire a guy halfway through, does that mean you already have your next guy in mind? Like, you already know this is who we're going to put all of our money on. We're putting all of our chips in the pot. This is who we're absolutely going after the hardest to see if we can get him as our head coach. Do you have that? Or is it one of those, we just have to make such a drastic change right now and just hope for the best? And I would even argue that for college and for the NFL. Like, I've never understood the whole fire a coach midway through the season type thing. I do get it sometimes because it provides a little bit of a spark to a team. Okay, you know, fans are a little bit happier. The guy's gone. You know, now we can kind of see what we have as a team. I don't always feel that that's the best thing to do, though, because we've seen coaches be able to make the turnaround before, you know, and sometimes it is one of those, you have to pull the Band-Aid off and you just have to do it and get it over with. Even as an LSU fan, I'm still saying fire Brian Kelly. Realistically, is that the smartest thing to do? No. But again, it's not really going to change the situation that you're in either. You know, when you look at Penn State, you're 3-3. Not the greatest. You're probably out of your chances of being able to make the, you know, college football playoffs and whatnot. You could still finish the year respectable. You could also still see, okay, how do you respond from this? You know, how do you respond from, you lost 3 in a row, you were a 25-point favorite over UCLA, you got upset. How do you respond to that? Now you lose to Northwestern. How do you respond to that? And you've lost your star quarterback. How do you do as a coach with this team to be able to make it work? Now, at the end of the season, if it's bad, hey, like you had the rest of the year from that point. We gave you all the time. We gave you everything you need to do. You didn't do anything. Pack your bags. Goodbye. I get that part. I don't get the firing mid-season because now everything's a mess. You're given an interim coach maybe a shot. And to me, that's, again, it's going to sound weird. To me, that's also really not fair for the interim coach, because then this guy has to inherit a team that, yes, he's a part of, and yes, he helped build, and yes, he helped understand and whatnot. But you give an interim coach this basically crap show as an athletic director, as a GM, and it's like, oh, what can you do with it? I don't know. Stir it and make it look like whipped crap instead of just, solid crap, I guess. Like that to me is just the weirdest thing for these poor interim coaches of, yeah, just see what you can do. Like, if you hand me a turd sandwich, it's still going to be a turd sandwich no matter how much I dress it up. It's just a well-dressed turd sandwich at that point. So eh, I feel bad for interim head coaches having to basically clean up the mess of that, and for guys to put them in that position. And then for some of these guys, if they ever do want to become a head coach in the future, especially if they don't do well, oh, well, let's see what your sample size. Ooh, you took over a Penn State team that was 3-3, lost their starting quarterback, and you went 0-6. Oh, yeah, you're not a good coach. Goodbye. Like that, like that sucks. Again, not every situation is going to be perfect, and they may or may not even struggle if they go somewhere else and they do get to build a team that they want. I just think that's dirty. Me personally. Nonetheless, real quick though, last part of college topics though, because I've talked about college so much. If you can't tell, it's my favorite thing to talk about. We have LSU at Vanderbilt. And I'll be honest, like I said, I was really, really hoping that this would end up being that this would end up proving me wrong and that LSU would be able to pull out a win. They unfortunately did not pull out the win. And I kind of figured this was going to happen because when I saw the matchup, and even though, Vanderbilt has one loss to Alabama, it's Diego Pavia. The dude can throw, and the dude is a runner. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, man, LSU is going to struggle because they do not do well against running quarterbacks at all. And that's been an issue for the last few years. And a lot of teams really don't do well against running quarterbacks to start with. LSU with a defense for the last few years that, anybody and everybody could run on, especially the quarterback. It's about the same with Vanderbilt and whatnot as the situation stands right now. So wasn't really surprised that Diego Pavia was able to run all over him. But what kind of still surprises me is how much crazy plays that LSU can do in the meantime. Xavier Thomas with the big catch, a huge run for 62 yards for the score. It gives a lot of, old school LSU fans kind of that Les Miles, treatment of super talented team that just gets a ton of lucky breaks. They're able to make it work for whatever reason, and they just find a way to make it work. But then in true LSU and Les Miles fashion, or now Brian Kelly, they ultimately end up coming short, and it's a heartbreaking type of loss. So to me, this is part of why I want Brian Kelly gone. It seems as though he refuses to make adjustments with the offense. There's obviously issues with the run game. There's a lot of issues with the offensive line. Now, the offensive line is very young. They're trying to get a lot of those guys experience, and he even admitted coming into the season it was going to be a lot of growing pains for the offensive line because they lose guys like Will Campbell, who's a first-round pick. They lose guys to transfer portal, graduating, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're trying to build a lot of young experience right there and right then, but it's definitely showing. There's injuries, there's inconsistency, and there's a lot of questions for me as an LSU fan to Garrett Nussmeier. It seems as though he's not only taken a step back, it leaves a lot of questions as to if he's taking this seriously or not. There's a lot of people that are, rumored to say that he has not taken the job as seriously as Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels did. Both of them putting in a tremendous amount of work to, take that next step forward. There's supposedly rumors about similar to the AI goggles, the virtual reality goggles and whatnot that you can use, and different tools, different ways of being able to take care of your body and whatnot to, make yourself as successful as possible there at LSU. And it does seem like ever since the season has started that Garrett Nussmeier has been hurt. And even though they, and I know he's going to deny it, he's going to tell reporters and team doctors, and they're going to report that he's fine. But then when you watch him play, it's obvious that's not the case by any stretch of the imagination, because just about every time he got hit, he'd come up, he'd be limping, he'd be hurting. And I don't know if that is truly affecting his decision making. And as a result, it's, having a lot of poor plays come up. The other issue is he's doing a lot of just the easiest way to put he's just doing a lot of dumb things with, you know, he's forcing the ball into double coverage. He's, potentially risking getting picked off. Now he's been lucky. A few of those haven't been picked off, but realistically, if he wasn't, he'd be sitting at a much higher interceptions this year than he is right now. Right now, he's sitting at 11 touchdowns to 5 picks. If some of those would be picked off, he might be about the same interception wise as he is to touchdowns right now. Just full transparent honesty. Like it's been bad. He against South Carolina, he threw 2 picks. Those were mainly in the red zone. When LSU was there 5 times, they got 1 touchdown out of it. He threw a pick against Ole Miss, and then he threw a pick against Florida. And obviously in between there, you've got, Southeastern Louisiana. He threw 3 touchdowns. Great. He threw 2 touchdowns against Vandy. Great. Other than that, he's thrown at least 1 to 2 picks in the last few games. And that's a little bit disheartening. It's a little bit it's concerning as an LSU fan if I see that, because I don't expect him to be perfect. I don't expect him to go crazy, but that's a little discouraging to see a guy that, last year had a lot of picks, but it was his first year starting. He'd make, some of the dicey, force it kind of throws, and that's fine because it's your first year. You're kind of learning to be a full-time starter. He's the son of a coach too, and he's still doing some of the really dumb mistakes that I don't get. The other thing that hurts, all honesty, as an LSU fan, their schedule coming up. They have a brutal schedule coming up that I only see a couple of maybe wins still left in there, and they're sitting at 5-2 right now. This weekend they host Texas A&M, who has a mobile quarterback, and like I said, LSU does not do well against them. I probably will have Texas A&M winning that. They have to go to Alabama. Alabama's probably going to win that, unfortunately. Then they host Texas and Western Kentucky, or not Texas. They host Arkansas and Western Kentucky. They'll probably win those. And then they end the year at Oklahoma. Now, depending on how Oklahoma does, that may or may not be for them to potentially try to go into the college football playoffs. So they may or may not be trying their hardest, because Oklahoma has an equally brutal schedule coming up, because they have Ole Miss, they have Tennessee, Alabama, Mizzou, and LSU. So who knows how they're going to end up. And say hypothetically LSU is on the fringe of being able to make something happen, as far as be it virtue, tiebreakers, whatever the case may be, Oklahoma may want to try to play spoiler to that. So it's a little disheartening as an LSU fan right now, because that defense is absolutely solid, and a lot of people would probably argue that, but they just don't have a complementary offense, unfortunately. And I think if they did, this would be a completely different story, all honesty. But that's just me. Let's get into real quick before we end the show. Let's talk a little bit of the NFL. Not as big of NFL news is happening as there is college football. A little bit of a surprise, though, that the Cleveland Browns dominate Miami in a way that we haven't seen Cleveland do in a while. They won 31-6. Dylan Gabriel, 13 of 18, 116 passing yards. Quentin Junkins, fantastic game. He had 84 yards rushing for 3 touchdowns. This Miami team just looks like it's a mess. Tua throws 3 picks. There's, the talks of the players only meetings. Tua's calling people out in the media. He's ratting 2 coaches, for these player meetings, that players are showing up late and whatnot. Again, to me, it's weird if you have to have a players only meeting, because you're already meeting with the coaches. You're already meeting either as an offense or a defense, whatever the case may be, as far as positions and teams go. Why are you meeting? Like, what else do you need to truly talk about that you feel is going to make a difference? Because to me, at least as a fan watching it, you can talk about something all you want. That's great, and I don't have anything against that. If you think that'll help, go for it. A lot of what you need to do is on the field. A lot of it is chemistry. A lot of it is, okay, what are we seeing? What are we looking at? Now, if it's player only meeting and you're like studying film, you're trying to break it down and help with that, by all means, go for it. We don't know if that's truly what they're doing or if that's the case or not. It probably should be, and it would probably help. But I would also make the argument, why don't you do that with your coaches? Because if you're trying to figure out and break down film, your coaches would probably be a great person to have in that, because one, your coach studies this just as much as you do. And, hey, I've ran this coverage before and this has helped stop this. So when they're in this formation, or if they're doing this, we should run this and this will help. That could be an option. Maybe it is some of those, like, other guys have to just absolutely step up, and they may not be doing it right now. And so for me, when I looked at this, I'm honestly surprised Mike McDaniel hasn't been fired yet. I think it will probably happen before the season is over. If he does manage to make it to the end of the season, I will be thoroughly impressed. We'll put it that way. But I don't have high hopes for Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins. Another kind of sad team right now. The New York Jets are 0-7 to start the year. They have had an absolutely brutal year so far. Justin Fields has been on and off hurt. Tyrod Taylor ended up coming in, finishing the game. Panthers do end up winning 13-6, so not exactly in the prettiest of fashions, but they end up, doing just enough to secure the win. This poor Jets team, and what's really bad is I don't know what direction the Jets are trying to go, because pretty much everything that we've seen as far as college football goes, none of the top quarterbacks that were projected to go into next year's draft and whatnot, who are going to be available to me, are first round quarterbacks right now. Like, none of them. Like, Garrett Nussmeier started the year, a potential first round quarterback. I'm personally just not seeing it. And even if he was, I don't think he's the answer in New York, just personally. Drew Aller was one before he got hurt. I think he'll probably want to come back and finish college and prove what he can do, because he did not exactly end college on a high note. So I think he would probably want to do that before trying to go into the league. Arch Manning, he is technically just a sophomore this year, so I don't see him leaving that early. I see him probably staying in college at least one more year, maybe even the full 2, just to, again, hone himself, kind of get himself ready for potentially what's to come. Lenore Sellers, I don't think is going to leave yet. He might be. Fernando Mendoza is probably going to be one of the top quarterbacks, if not the top quarterback taken, which I don't have an issue with. But for me, my big question is consistency. You have had a great year. You're still having a great year, and you're having a great year so far, and you're just 1 year with Indiana because you went to a better team than Cal, and you're playing great. They beat Oregon. They're absolutely a top, national competing team right now. But again, can you do that on a consistent basis? And are you going to be able to do that potentially for a team who there's not a whole lot of bright spots? Like, there's a very, very small handful of bright spots on the Jets. Can you do that if you're Fernando Mendoza and potentially elevate them? Or are you just unfortunately going to be another, quarterback bust for the Jets? For me, it leaves a lot of questions. And again, there's not a lot of true sample size of him not only being successful, but maintaining that level of success for a long period of time, i.e. a season to maybe even potentially 2 seasons. Not saying he's got to go out and be undefeated, win multiple Heismans, nothing like that. But he wasn't exactly turning heads at Cal. Well, he was enough to be able to, be in the transfer portal, but not enough for me to say, oh, this guy's going to be an NFL quarterback, at least personally. And then, of course, the final game, the one that was probably one of the best games to watch all weekend, the Giants at the Broncos. The Giants were ahead 19-0 to start the fourth quarter, and the Broncos scored 33 points to ultimately come away with the victory. Bo Nix, 2 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns to boot. Jackson Dart, 3 touchdown passes, 1 pick, and a rushing touchdown to boot. So Jackson Dart looks absolutely solid for the Giants. He seems to have them believing in themselves again, and seems to have the fans believing. So this was definitely a heartbreaker for them to have this happen. But the other thing to blame for the Giants, the defense should not have given up 33 points, especially if you're ahead by that. That's just more of a defense that, just kind of watch things happen and just didn't really let it kind of let everything go to their head. They didn't keep their foot on the gas pedal. And then honestly, the kicker too. If the kicker did not miss that extra point, they would potentially at least be going to overtime and make things a little bit more interesting and at least give them a chance. to be able to do that. And so it is interesting that the Giants of all teams have this happen. You could tell Brian Daboll's frustrated. I know Yoel is a huge Giants fan. He may or may not be watching, or he may or may not watch it later. For Giants fans, like I kind of asked a few weeks ago, do you want to get rid of Daboll, or do you just want to get rid of the GM, or do you get rid of both? And for me, it's just crazy at the fact that they still have the GM. Like, to me, I would keep Brian Daboll because he is able to have success. He had success with Daniel Jones. Obviously, he's had success with his rookie quarterback, even albeit it's his rookie season, so not many people know what to expect with him being in the pros. There's bright spots and there's a future. To me, the GM has a lot of questions because he's built this team for years and he hasn't been able to do much with it. Brian Daboll, yes, has had a hand in that, but there's only so much you can do when your GM decides, yeah, we want to pay Daniel Jones a ton of money, but we don't want to pay our star running back and Saquon Barkley a lot of money, which to me, absolutely crazy. But nonetheless, though, I appreciate everybody tuning in. Hope everybody enjoyed. If you did like my content, if you like this, you can catch this wherever you get any of your podcasts at, Facebook, YouTube. You can pretty much catch it absolutely anywhere inside the Hoosier Mind. And if you like Military Broadcast Radio is great. There's a ton of veteran hosts that give advice. They like to tell stories. They talk to other veterans. They talk to first responders, law enforcement, nurses. They tell their own stories. They have all sorts of great things here at Military Broadcast Radio to help other veterans and honestly let veterans tell their story. It's one of the coolest things, and one of the things that people don't really realize and people need to truly understand. The most powerful thing that you can have as an individual, no matter who you are, your age, your background, anything like that, is your voice. And that's the most powerful thing that you can own. It's the most powerful thing that you can use. And Military Broadcast Radio is great because it helps give veterans a microphone. It gives them a platform. It gives them the tools to teach them how to use that voice, how to amplify it, and how to help, spread awareness, teach other people, teach other veterans, life lessons, and just anything. Because all honesty, for a lot of people, they just want to talk and they want to be heard. And that's the beauty of MBR. We have a ton of great hosts that have all sorts of great shows. So definitely check them out. All of their social media is up here just above me at MB Radio. Or you can just, Google or search up mbradio.us. Or if you're visual, there's a little QR code right here that you can scan that'll take you to their website to teach you more about them. But appreciate everybody tuning in. Hope everybody enjoyed, and we will see y'all later.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.